Listen to this amazing story of Tufail ibn Amr and how he became Muslim by listening to the Quran. Assalamu alaikum everyone, welcome back to The Proof That Islam is the Truth. And today we're talking about the stories of those people who heard the Quran and how it influenced them and affected them. And today we're talking about Tufail ibn Amr, the chief of the Daws tribe, he was on his way to make Hajj, pilgrimage to Mecca. And the Quraysh, the leaders of the Quraysh, were waiting for him. They were waiting, telling the people, don't listen to Muhammad. His magic of his speech is going to make you go mad and turn you away from everything that you know and you love. So this is his story. He says, I approached Mecca. As soon as the Quraysh leaders saw me, they came up to me and gave me a most hearty welcome and accommodated me in a grand house. Sure knew how to look after people. Their leaders and notables then gathered and said, O Tufail, you have come to our town, and this man, he claims he's a prophet, has ruined our authority. Notice, he's ruined our authority and shattered our community. We are afraid that he would succeed in undermining you and your authority and your community, just as he has done with us. Don't speak to the man. On no account listen to anything he has to say. He has the speech of a wizard, causing division between father and son, between brother and brother, between husband and wife. And they kept on telling me the most fantastic stories and scared me by recounting tales of his incredible deeds. I made up my mind then not to approach this man or speak to him or listen to anything he had to say. The following morning, I went to the place of worship, went to the Kaaba and made tawaf around the Kaaba as an act of worship to the idols that we made pilgrimage to and glorified. I put cotton in my ears out of fear that something of the speech of Muhammad might affect me. As soon as I entered the place of worship, I saw him standing near the Kaaba. He saw the Prophet Muhammad standing near the Kaaba. He was praying in a fashion which was different from our prayer. His whole manner of worship was different. The scene captivated me. His worship made me tremble, and I felt drawn to him despite myself, until I was quite close to him. Notwithstanding the precaution I had taken, God willed that some of what he was saying reached my hearing, and I said to myself, what are you doing, Tufail? You are a perceptive poet. You can distinguish between the good and the bad in the poetry. What prevents you from listening to what this man is saying? If what comes from him is good, accept it. And if it's bad, reject it. I remained there until the Prophet left for his home. I followed him and he entered his home, and I entered also, and I said, O Muhammad, your people have said certain things about you to me. By God, they kept frightening me with these things and keeping away from your message until I blocked my ears to keep out your words. Despite this, God caused me to hear something of it and I found it good. So tell me more about your mission. The Prophet ﷺ told Tufail about the mission, and Tufail said, and then he recited to me Surah Al-Falaq. And he said, I swear by God, I have never heard such beautiful words before. I had never heard such beautiful words before. Neither was a more noble mission ever described to me. Thereupon I stretched out my hand to him in allegiance and testified that there was none worthy of worship except the one God, and that Muhammad was truly the messenger of God. And that's how I entered the religion of Islam. Even the leaders of the Quraysh were unable to desist themselves from hearing the Quran. Tufail heard the Quran, and as I said, he heard it and he became Muslim. But actually even the leaders of the Quraysh, They were unable to desist and to resist. In fact, according to the seerah, or the biography of Ibn Ishaq, he mentions one incident when Abu Sufyan, who was one of the leaders of the Quraysh, and Abu Jahl and Abu Akhnas, they sneaked out of their houses in the night to listen to the Prophet reciting the Quran, hiding in their places until dawn. They sneaked out of them and they stayed listening to the Quran until the dawn, hiding. And on the way home, they bumped into each other and they reproached one another, saying, "Don't you ever do that again. For if one of the weak-minded fools sees you, it will arouse suspicion in their minds." So they all promised. But this happened 3 nights in a row. 3 nights in a row, they snuck out to listen to the Prophet reciting the Quran, and again they bumped into each other until they took a totally solemn oath. They swore that they would never do it again. This is the question, my dear listeners, that I want you to put to yourself. How is it possible for an unlettered and unlearned man, not versed in poetry, to be able to produce a work of unrivaled eloquence and perfect rhetoric, so that even the assembled experts and masters of all the forms of poetry and the Arabic language were unable to produce the like of its smallest chapter? Indeed, they chose to fight the Prophet rather than meet this challenge. The flower of the nobility were killed, their trade and reputation destroyed. How could they choose this rather than count the verses of the Quran? Let us look at another story. This is the story of Umar ibn al-Khattab. He became one of the strongest defenders of Islam. But before that, he was one of the most violent enemies against the Muslims. He took it upon himself to physically abuse and attack the Muslims. And things became so bad for the Muslims that they were forced to flee. And this was something unheard of. That people should flee their own tribes, that they should flee their own people, because the Arabian society was held together by tribalism. But the Muslims were fleeing their own tribes and they fled to go and live in Abyssinia. And when this happened, Umar really began to think about things. And he was really unhappy about it. And the more he thought about it, the more unhappy he got. Until one day he decided, I am going to kill Muhammad. I've had enough. He took his sword and he was on his way to kill the Prophet Muhammad. But on the way, he met one of the people who had become Muslim secretly. And he said to him, "Where are you going, Umar, with your sword drawn like that?" He said, "I'm on my way to kill Muhammad." So he started to think, what can I do? And then he remembered that in fact the sister of Umar had already become Muslim. He said, "You know what, before you deal with Muhammad, maybe you should deal with your own family first." He said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Your sister, she has become Muslim." So Umar was so infuriated. He was so mad. He changed direction, still with his sword drawn. He headed off to his sister's house. He arrived. And when he got to the door, he heard a noise that he had not heard before. He smashed down the door, and there he found his sister and her husband reading something. She jumped up, and he hit his sister, and she fell on the floor and started to bleed. The sister of Omar said, "Okay, I have become Muslim. Do what you like with me. Kill me. I don't care. I've become Muslim. So what?" And when Omar saw his sister lying there, bleeding and so vigorous and defending herself and not even afraid to die, he calmed down. He said, "My sister, what is that you are reading?" She said, "They are the verses of the Quran, the speech of God, the words of Allah." He said, "Let me see it." She said, "No, not until you wash yourself first." So she made Omar wash his hands so he could not touch the paper of the Quran without washing himself. And then he sat down and he began to read. And as he read, and as he read, and as he read, the Quran began to enter his heart. He put the Quran down and he went off. He went to the place where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. Where is Muhammad? He said. Their people were saying, Muhammad, it is Umar. He has come. The Prophet said, let him in. Umar came. He said, O Muhammad, I testify and bear witness that there is nothing worthy of worship except the one God, Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. And this is how one of the strongest and most vigorous opponents of Islam, Umar, became one of the most strongest and vigorous defenders of Islam. And he is famous until today for his justice and for his piety and for his standing up for the truth. It's another story of another person who embraced Islam just from hearing the beautiful words of the Quran. How much more do you need in order to be convinced that Islam is the truth? You need to hear more stuff? Well, there is more. Join us in our next episode for more amazing evidences of the divine origin of the Quran and for the proof that Islam is the truth. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.